Victor Ashford cornered Garrett in the cattle pen with a proposition wrapped in a threat. Marry my scarred daughter, or I'll make sure you never work in this territory again. I'll tell every rancher from here to Montana you're a thief and a coward. Garrett agreed out of fear, bracing himself for a life shackled to a woman whose face was supposedly so horrifying her father hid her away like a shameful secret. But when the veil was lifted on their wedding day and Garrett finally saw what Victor Ashford had called hideous scars, the breath left his lungs not from revulsion, but from the stunning realization that he'd been deceived, and the real monster in this story wasn't the woman standing before him. Before we continue, let me ask you something. If someone threatened to destroy your career unless you married a person you'd never seen, would you judge them based on others' descriptions or trust your own eyes? Drop your honest answer below. The Montana sun was merciless in late August, beating down on the cattle pen where Garrett Cole stood knee-deep in dust and manure, separating the yearlings from the breeding stock. It was hard work, the kind that made a man grateful for the job even while his muscles screamed and sweat stung his eyes. Garrett had been doing this work for 10 years, ever since Victor Ashford had given a broke 22-year-old drifter a chance at the Ashford Ranch. 10 years of loyalty. 10 years of proving himself. 10 years of rising from hired hand to ranch foreman, earning the respect of every cowboy on the property and the trust of Victor Ashford himself. Which was why Garrett knew something was wrong the moment he saw Ashford approaching the pen in his Sunday suit at 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. Cole. Ashford's voice carried across the pen, sharp and commanding. My office. Now. The other hands exchanged glances. Ashford never pulled the foreman away from work in the middle of the day, and he never wore his suit unless he was going to town or attending something important. Garrett wiped his hands on his chaps and climbed out of the pen, trying to ignore the knot forming in his gut. Yes, sir. The walk to Ashford's office in the main house felt longer than usual. Garrett's mind raced through possibilities. Had he made some mistake with the books? Had one of the hands filed a complaint? Has Ashford found a better foreman? The office was cool and dark after the bright heat outside. Ashford moved behind his massive oak desk, but didn't sit down. Instead, he poured 2 glasses of expensive whiskey, the kind he only brought out for serious occasions, and pushed one across the desk toward Garrett. That's when Garrett knew this wasn't about ranch business. Sit down, Cole. Garrett sat, but didn't touch the whiskey. Ashford drained his own glass in one swallow, then poured another. His hands, Garrett noticed, were shaking slightly. I'm going to tell you something, Ashford said, his back to Garrett as he stared out the window, that I've never told another living soul outside my family. And then I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. Sir, if this is about my daughter. Ashford cut him off. Rosalie. She's 24 years old, and you've never seen her. Neither has anyone else in this territory, except Doc Patterson and my sister Constance. Garrett had heard whispers about Ashford's daughter everyone had. The hidden daughter. The one Ashford never talked about, never brought to town, never allowed at any of the ranch gatherings. Some folks said she was simple-minded. Others said she was deformed. A few cruel souls said Ashford kept her locked in the attic like a madwoman. I keep her hidden, Ashford continued, his voice rough, because she's scared. Badly scarred. When she was 8 years old, there was a fire. Her mother died saving her, but Rosalie. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. Half her face was burned. The scars are extensive. Hideous, most people would say. I've had 3 men court her over the years, good men I thought might see past appearances. All 3 of them took one look and couldn't hide their revulsion. One of them actually vomited. Garrett felt his stomach turn, not from imagining the scars, but from imagining what that rejection must have felt like for a young woman who'd already lost her mother. I'm sorry, sir. That's terrible, but I don't understand what this has to do with. I'm dying, Cole. Ashford turned to face him, and Garrett saw the truth in his employer's eyes. The gray pallor beneath his tan. The way his suit hung looser than it had 6 months ago. Cancer. Doc Patterson gives me a year, maybe less. And when I'm gone, Rosalie will be alone. 24 years old, scarred, with no husband, no family except my sister who's 70 and in poor health herself. She'll inherit this ranch, 40,000 acres, 3,000 head of cattle, more money than she could spend in a lifetime. She'll be a target, Garrett said quietly, understanding dawning. Every fortune hunter, con man, and desperate rancher in Montana will be circling her before my body's cold, Ashford confirmed. And she'll know it. She'll know they only want her money, that they are probably repulsed by her face but willing to overlook it for the price of this ranch. That's no life for my daughter. That's a slow torture. Ashford moved to stand directly in front of Garrett, his eyes hard and desperate in equal measure. I want you to marry her. The words hit Garrett like a physical blow. Sir, I've watched you for 10 years. You're honest. You're hardworking. You're kind to the animals and fair with the men. You don't drink to excess. You don't gamble. You don't chase women. You're a good man, Garrett Cole. And more importantly, you're a man who understands what it means to be judged for circumstances beyond your control. That last part stung because it was true. Garrett had grown up dirt poor, the son of a drunk who died in a bar fight when Garrett was 12. He'd worked every kind of job imaginable, farmhand, stable boy, freight hauler, always dismissed as that trash coal boy no matter how hard he worked. It wasn't until he drifted far enough from his hometown that he could build a new reputation based on his actions instead of his bloodline. I can't marry someone I've never met, Garrett said, trying to keep his voice steady. That's not fair to her or to me. Fair? Ashford's laugh was bitter. Nothing about this is fair. But it's necessary. I'll sweeten the deal, marry Rosalie, treat her well, protect her after I'm gone, and I'll sign over the north section. 10,000 acres. You'll be a landowner, not just a foreman. You'll finally have the security you've been working toward. 10,000 acres. It was a fortune. The kind of property that would make Garrett somebody in this territory, that would prove to everyone who'd ever dismissed him that he was worth something. But marriage, to a woman so scared her own father described her as hideous. A woman he'd never even seen. What if I say no? Garrett asked, though his gut already knew the answer. Ashford's expression went cold, the desperation replaced by ruthless pragmatism. Then I'll have to let you go. Can't have you as foreman if you won't help me solve the most important problem of my life. And I'll make sure every rancher from here to Montana knows you refuse to help a dying man protect his daughter. I'll tell them you're unreliable, disloyal. I'll say you stole from me. I'll say you're a coward who ran when things got difficult. You'll never work as a foreman again. Hell, you'll be lucky to get work mucking stables. Garrett's hands clenched into fists. That's a lie. All of it. It is, Ashford agreed without shame. But I'm a wealthy man with connections, and you're a foreman with a questionable past. Who do you think they'll believe? I'll destroy your reputation so thoroughly you'll have to leave Montana entirely. And even then, word travels. You'll spend the rest of your life proving yourself all over again, always one step behind the rumors. This is blackmail. This is a father doing whatever it takes to protect his daughter. Ashford's voice shook with emotion. You think I want to do this? You think I want to force my daughter into marriage with someone who's being coerced? But I've spent 16 years watching her suffer, watching her hide, watching her shrink into herself because the world decided her scars made her unworthy of love. And I won't leave her alone in that world without someone I trust to stand beside her. So yes, I'm blackmailing you. I'm using every bit of power and influence I have to force your hand. Because protecting Rosalie matters more than your freedom, your feelings, or my own conscience. Garrett stared at his employer, this man he'd respected for 10 years and saw him clearly for the first time. Victor Ashford wasn't a villain. He was just a desperate father who'd run out of options and decided that morality was a luxury he couldn't afford. And Garrett was trapped. If he refused, he'd lose everything he'd built in Montana. He'd be starting over at 32 years old with a ruined reputation, no money, and no prospects. He'd spend years rebuilding what Ashford would destroy in a matter of weeks. But if he agreed, he'd be married to a woman he'd never seen. A woman whose own father described her scars as hideous and extensive. A woman who'd probably hate him for being another man forced to tolerate her appearance for the price of land and money. There was no good choice. There was only survival. When Garrett heard himself ask, the word tasting like surrender. 2 weeks. September 10th. Small ceremony, just family, Doc Patterson, and Reverend Walsh. You'll move into the main house after the wedding. I've already had papers drawn up about the land transfers to you immediately, but the marriage is binding. No annulment unless Rosalie agrees to it. And Cole Ashford's eyes bought into him. If you're ever cruel to her, if you ever make her feel like she's less than she is, if you ever give her reason to regret this marriage beyond the fact that it's forced, I will ruin you in ways that make blackmail look merciful. Do you understand? Yes, sir. The words came out flat, emotionless. Good. Ashford poured himself another whiskey. You'll meet her at the altar. Not before. She's been through enough humiliation without having to endure your judgment before the ceremony. And Cole, despite everything, I hope you'll give her a fair chance. She deserves that much. After Garrett left the office, he stood on the porch of the main house, staring out at the ranch he'd helped build, the land he'd worked for a decade, and tried to process what had just happened. In 2 weeks, he'd be married. To a woman whose face was so scarred her father had kept her hidden for 16 years. To someone he'd never seen, never spoken to, never chosen. To a stranger who was probably as trapped by this arrangement as he was. Garrett thought about the whiskey he'd left untouched in Ashford's office and wished he'd drained it. Then he wished he'd drained the whole damn bottle. 2 weeks until September 10th. 14 days to prepare for a future he hadn't chosen and couldn't escape. He should run. Pack his things, saddle his horse, ride out tonight and never look back. But where would he go? He was 32 with no savings beyond what he'd need to get him to the next territory. And Ashford would spread those lies, would ensure that Garrett Cole became synonymous with thief and coward in every ranching community from Montana to Texas. He was trapped as surely as if Ashford had put him in chains. And somewhere in that big house, hidden away from the world, was a woman named Rosalie who was probably just as trapped, just as angry, just as resigned to a future neither of them wanted. Garrett walked back to the bunkhouse, ignoring the curious looks from the other hands, and lay on his narrow bed staring at the ceiling. In 2 weeks, his life would change forever, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange fog. Garrett went through the motions of his work managing the hands, overseeing the cattle operations, handling the 100 daily crises that came with running a ranch this size, but his mind was elsewhere, always circling back to September 10th, to the wedding, to Rosalie Ashford and the scars that had defined her entire life. He didn't tell anyone. Ashford had been clear that the wedding would be private, and Garrett wasn't eager to explain to the ranch hands that he was being blackmailed into marriage. Let them find out after the fact. Let them think whatever they want to think. But keeping silent meant keeping the anxiety bottled up, and it ate at him. At night, lying in his bunk, he'd catch himself imagining what the scars might look like. He tried not to. It felt cruel, reducing a woman to her injuries. But his mind conjured images anyway, images that grew more grotesque the longer he dwelt on them. Half her face, Ashford had said. Extensive burns. Hideous. Garrett had seen burn scars before. A ranch hand caught in a bonfire. A cook who'd had boiling water spill on her arm. He knew how devastating fire could be to human flesh, how it twisted and melted skin into something that no longer looked quite human. And he hated himself for the revulsion he felt imagining it. Hated himself for being shallow enough to care. Hated himself for dreading the moment he'd have to look at his wife's face and pretend he didn't notice, didn't care, wasn't bothered by what fire had done to her. She deserved better than his pity, better than his forced acceptance, better than a husband who was only there because her father had threatened to destroy him. But this was the hand they'd both been dealt. On September 9th, the day before the wedding, Ashford summoned him again. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, Ashford said without preamble. The Reverend will be here. My sister Constance will stand as witness. Doc Patterson will attend as well. You'll wear your Sunday suit. The ceremony will be brief. Afterward, you'll move your things into the guest room on the second floor. Rosalie's room is at the end of the hall. I don't expect you to share a room immediately. That's between you and her, and I'll thank you not to force anything she's not ready for. I wouldn't, Garrett said, offended by the implication. Good. Ashford studied him. You look like hell, Cole. Not sleeping. Would you be sleeping if you were me? Probably not. Ashford poured 2 glasses of whiskey, pushed one across the desk. This time, Garrett took it. I know this isn't what you wanted. I know you probably hate me for forcing this. But I need you to understand something. Rosalie didn't ask for this either. She argued against it. Said she'd rather live alone than trap some man in a marriage he didn't want. But she's my daughter, and I'm dying, and I made the decision for both of you because I'm the only one with the power to do it. Does she know? Garrett asked. Did you threaten me? She knew I gave you an ultimatum. She doesn't know the specifics, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't tell her. It would only make her feel wise. God forbid she feels worse about being used as a bargaining chip in her father's scheme. Ashford's jaw tightened. Watch yourself, Cole. Or what? You'll threaten to ruin me? Already done that, sir. The whiskey made Garrett bold, reckless. I'm here because I have no choice. She's here because she has no choice. The only person who got what they wanted is you. So forgive me if I'm not particularly concerned about your feelings right now. For a moment, Garrett thought Ashford might hit him, or fire him on the spot, wedding be damned. But instead, the older man just looked tired, old, defeated in a way that had nothing to do with their argument and everything to do with the cancer eating him from the inside. You're right, Ashford said quietly. I'm a selfish bastard who's destroying 2 lives to give myself peace of mind before I die. But I'm doing it anyway, because I love my daughter more than I care about being a good man. And if that makes me a monster, then so be it. I'll die a monster who knows his daughter is protected. The fight went out of Garrett. He finished his whiskey and stood. Is there anything else, sir? Just this. Ashford met his eyes. However you feel about me, however you feel about this situation, please don't take it out on Rosalie. She's innocent in all this. She's been hurt enough. I would never. I know. That's why I chose you. Ashford's expression softened slightly. Get some sleep, Cole. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Garrett didn't sleep. He lay awake all night, listening to the sounds of the bunkhouse, the snoring of the other hands, the creaks of wood settling, the distant howl of a coyote. He thought about running one last time. Thought about saddling his horse and riding out before dawn, consequences be damned. But he didn't, because he was a man who kept his word, even when his word had been extracted under duress. And because some part of him, the part that had been that trash Cowboy everyone dismissed, understood what it felt like to be judged for something you couldn't control. To be hidden away because the world found you unacceptable. If he ran, he'd be just like those other men who'd taken one look at Rosalie and vomited. Just like everyone who'd ever looked at young Garrett Cole and seen trash instead of potential. He wouldn't be that person. He'd go through with this, and he'd treat Rosalie Ashford with respect and dignity, and if he couldn't give her love, he'd at least give her decency. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. September 10th dawned clear and cool, the first hint of autumn in the air. Garrett bathed in the cold water of the ranch's bathhouse, scrubbing away 10 years of dirt and sweat like he could scrub away the dread sitting heavy in his chest. He shaved carefully, nicking himself twice because his hands were shaking. He put on his one good suit, the same one he'd worn to funerals and the occasional trip to church, and stared at himself in the cracked mirror. He looked like a man going to his execution. At 1:30, he walked to the main house. His legs felt like lead. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. The house had been decorated simply with some wildflowers in vases, the good china set out for the small celebration afterward. Reverend Walsh was already there, a thin man with kind eyes and a sympathetic expression that made Garrett want to punch something. Doc Patterson stood near the fireplace, talking quietly with an elderly woman who must be Constance, Ashford's sister. Ashford himself stood near the stairs, looking up toward the second floor. Waiting. Cole. Ashford gestured to him. Stand here by the Reverend. Rosalie will be down shortly. Garrett took his position, his mouth dry, his palms sweating. Reverend Walsh gave him an encouraging nod. Nervous, son? You have no idea. All grooms are nervous. It's natural. It's not nerves, Garrett wanted to say. It's dreadful. It's the knowledge that in a few minutes I'm going to see what fire did to an 8-year-old girl. And I'm going to have to hide my reaction, and I'm going to hate myself for having a reaction at all. But he just nodded and waited. He heard her before he saw her. Soft footsteps on the stairs. The rustle of fabric. Ashford moved to meet her at the bottom of the stairs, offering his arm. You look beautiful, sweetheart, Ashford said, his voice thick with emotion. Don't lie, Papa. Her voice was soft, melodic, tinged with resignation. Not today. I'm not lying. You've never looked more beautiful. Garrett couldn't see her yet. She was behind her father, hidden by his bulk and by the heavy veil that covered her face and cascaded down over her shoulders. The veil was white lace, delicate and expensive, thick enough that Garrett couldn't make out any features beneath it. Ashford led her forward, and Garrett got his first impression of Rosalie Ashford, average height, slender build, moving with a grace that suggested strength rather than fragility. Her dress was simple but elegant, cream-colored silk that fit her perfectly. Her hands, glimpsed beneath the veil, were delicate and unmarked. She stopped beside him, and Garrett caught a faint scent of lavender and something sweeter. Honey, maybe. Reverend Walsh began the ceremony. Garrett heard the words as if from a great distance. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. His heart was hammering. In a few minutes, the veil would lift, and he'd see what Victor Ashford had kept hidden for 16 years. He'd see the scars that had defined Rosalie's entire life. He'd see the face that made grown men vomit. And he'd have to school his expression into something that wouldn't hurt her worse than she'd already been hurt. Do you, Garrett Thomas Cole, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. The words came automatically. Do you, Rosalie Catherine Ashford, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? A pause. Then, so quietly Garrett almost didn't hear it. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Reverend Walsh smiled. You may kiss your bride. This was it. The moment Garrett had been dreading for 2 weeks. He turned to face Rosalie fully. His hands were shaking as he reached for the veil. She stood perfectly still, her head bowed slightly, her body tense as a bowstring. Garrett lifted the veil slowly, giving himself time to prepare, to brace for whatever he was about to see. The veil rose, inch by inch, past her chin, past her lips, past her nose, and then he saw her face. The breath left Garrett's lungs in a rush. Rosalie Ashford was staring at him with eyes the color of honey, gold brown, and bright with unshed tears. Her face was heart-shaped, delicate, with high cheekbones and a small, straight nose. Her skin was pale and smooth as cream. And there, running from just above her right eyebrow, across her temple, and down her cheek to the corner of her jaw, was a scar. A single scar, thin and silvery white, healed long ago into a fine line that caught the light. It was noticeable, certainly. It drew the eye. But it wasn't hideous. It wasn't extensive. It wasn't half her face. It was barely anything at all. And Rosalie Ashford, even with the scar, maybe especially with the scar, which gave her face character and story and strength, was the most beautiful woman Garrett had ever seen. He stood frozen, staring at her, his brain trying to reconcile what he'd been told with what he was seeing. This was hideous. This was so terrible that men had vomited at the sight of her. This delicate silver line was the reason Victor Ashford had hidden his daughter for 16 years. I know, Rosalie whispered, misinterpreting his shock. Her voice was shaking. I'm sorry. I know it's terrible. Papa said you knew, that you'd agreed anyway. But I understand if you... No. The word came out strangled. Garrett reached up without thinking and touched her face, his fingertips tracing the line of the scar with a gentleness that surprised them both. No, that's not Rosalie. You're beautiful. She flinched like he'd slapped her. Don't. Please don't lie to make me feel better. I've had enough of that. I'm not lying. Garrett's hand was still on her face, and she hadn't pulled away, and he could feel her trembling beneath his touch. Your father said he said the scars were extensive, hideous. He said half your face was burned. But this, he traced the scar again, his thumb gentle against her cheekbone. This is barely anything. You're stunning, Rosalie. I've been dreading this moment for 2 weeks because I thought I'd have to hide my reaction to something terrible, but there's nothing terrible here. There's just you. And you're. He couldn't finish. Couldn't find words for what he was feeling. Relief, yes, but also anger, fury at Victor Ashford for lying, for exaggerating, for making both of them believe something that wasn't true. And beneath that, something else. Something that felt dangerously like awe. Rosalie was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. You really mean that? I really mean that. You're not disgusted? Not even a little bit. A tear slipped down her cheek, down the scarred side, and Garrett caught it with his thumb. Then why? Her voice broke. Why did Papa tell you I was hideous? Why did he make it sound like I was some kind of monster you'd have to force yourself to tolerate? And suddenly, with the clarity of lightning, Garrett understood. He was testing me, Garrett said slowly. He told me the worst possible version so that if I agreed to marry you anyway, he'd know I was doing it for the right reasons. Not because you're beautiful, which you are, but because I'm the kind of man who'd treat you well regardless of what you looked like. That's Rosalie's eyes went wide. That's horrible. That's manipulative and cruel, and that's your father, Garrett finished. Doing whatever it takes to protect you, even if it means lying to both of us. They stared at each other, and Garrett saw the exact moment Rosalie realized he was right. Saw the anger and hurt flash across her beautiful face. Saw her expression crumble as she turned to look at her father, who was watching them both with an expression of profound relief. Papa. Rosalie's voice was shaking with fury. What did you tell him? Exactly what did you say about my scars? Ashford had the grace to look ashamed. I exaggerated. I wanted to make sure. You told him I was hideous. Rosalie's voice rose, tears streaming down her face now. You told him my scars were extensive, that half my face was burned, that men had vomited at the sight of me. You made him think he was agreeing to marry a monster. I had to know he was a good man, so you lied to us both. Rosalie stepped away from Garrett, toward her father, her hands clenched into fists. You made him dread this day for 2 weeks. You made me believe he'd have to force himself to even look at me. How dare you, Papa? How dare you use my scars and my trauma as some kind of test? Rosalie, sweetheart, I was just trying to. I know what you were trying to do, and I hate that it worked. She turned back to Garrett, her eyes blazing. You agreed to marry me thinking I was hideous. You agreed to a life with someone you thought you'd find repulsive. Why? What did he threaten you with? Garrett hesitated. Ashford shook his head in warning. But Garrett had seen enough lies today. He said he'd ruin my reputation if I refused. Said he'd spread rumors that I was a thief and a coward. That I'd never work in Montana again. Rosalie closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling. So neither of us wanted this. We were both trapped. Yes. And now we're married. She opened her eyes, looked at the ring on her finger like she was seeing it for the first time. Bound together by my father's manipulation. I'm sorry, Ashford started. Get out. Rosalie's voice was cold. All of you. I want to speak to my husband alone. Reverend Walsh and Doc Patterson left quickly, sensing the tension. Constance followed, patting Rosalie's shoulder as she passed. Ashford lingered, but Rosalie stared him down until he, too, retreated, closing the parlor door behind him, leaving Garrett alone with his wife. What would you do if you discovered your father had lied to both you and your spouse to manipulate your marriage? Forgive him, or cut him out of your life? Let me know in the comments. Rosalie stood in the center of the parlor, her wedding dress gleaming in the afternoon light, tears streaming down her face. The scar caught the light as she moved, a silver thread against cream, and Garrett couldn't stop looking at it. Not because it was hideous, but because it was part of her story. Part of what had shaped her into the woman standing before him, strong enough to confront her father, honest enough to demand the truth. I'm sorry, Garrett said, because he didn't know what else to say. For what? Rosalie's laugh was bitter. You're as much a victim in this as I am. More, maybe. At least I knew what I looked like. You spent 2 weeks imagining something terrible. I did, Garrett admitted. and I feel like an ass for it now. Don't. Rosalie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing tears across both cheeks. You were reacting to what you were told. That's not your fault. She moved to the window, staring out at the ranch. I should have known Papa would do something like this. He's been trying to marry me off for years. After the third rejection, after that the man looked at my face and... She touched her scar unconsciously. I told Papa I was done. That I'd rather be alone than watch another man struggle to hide his disgust. I'm not disgusted, Garrett said again, because it seemed important that she believed him. I know. Rosalie turned to look at him, studying his face like she was searching for lies. I can see it in your eyes. You're relieved. You expected something terrible and got something manageable instead. That's not, Garrett started, then stopped. Because she was partially right. He was relieved. But it was more than that. Rosalie, you're not manageable. You're not some burden I'm tolerating. You're beautiful. Genuinely beautiful. And I spent 2 weeks preparing myself to marry someone I thought I'd have to force myself to look at. And instead I'm standing here wondering how in the hell your father convinced anyone that you were anything less than stunning. Rosalie's breath caught. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it to make you feel better. I'm saying it because it's true. Garrett moved closer, slow and careful like he was approaching a skittish horse. Your father exaggerated the scars, but he undersold everything else. He didn't tell me you were graceful, or that you have this way of moving that makes you look like you're dancing even when you're just walking. He didn't tell me your eyes are the color of honey, or that your voice sounds like music. Stop. Rosalie held up one hand. Please stop. I can't handle pretty lies right now. They're not lies. Garrett stopped a few feet away from her, close enough to see the gold flecks in her eyes, the way her chest rose and fell with agitated breaths. But I understand if you can't believe me yet. God knows we've both been lied to enough today. They stood in silence, the weight of the ceremony still hanging between them. Married. They are married now, bound together by law and circumstance and Victor Ashford's desperate scheming. What do we do now? Rosalie asked quietly. We're married, but neither of us chose this. We don't know each other. We don't love each other. What kind of marriage can we possibly build from this? Garrett had been asking himself the same question. An honest one, maybe. No more lies. No more manipulation. Just two people trying to make the best of a situation neither of them wanted. That's not much of a foundation. It's more than a lot of marriages start with, Garrett pointed out. At least we're starting with our eyes open. We know the worst already, that we were both coerced, that this isn't a love match, that we've got every reason to resent each other and your father. So what? We just try to be friends. Rosalie's voice was skeptical. We could start there. Get to know each other. See if there's anything worth building on. Garrett paused. Or we could get the marriage annulled. Your father said no annulment unless you agreed to it. But if you want out, I won't fight you. I'll give you the 10,000 acres he promised me and walk away. You'd be free, and you'd have enough land to support yourself without needing any man. Rosalie stared at him like he'd suggested flying to the moon. You'd give up the land. I'd give up a lot more than that to not trap someone in a marriage they hate. Even though Papa would ruin your reputation. Even though. Garrett met her eyes steadily. I've been the trash cowboy before. I can be him again if I have to. But I won't be the man who kept a woman prisoner because it was convenient. For a long moment, Rosalie just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she did something that surprised them both, and she laughed. Not a bitter laugh or a sarcastic laugh, but a real laugh that lit up her face and made her scar crease in a way that only made her more beautiful. What's funny? Garrett asked, confused. You. Rosalie shook her head, still smiling. Papa spent 2 weeks convincing you I was a monster, and you agreed to marry me anyway. And now you've seen I'm not, and you're offering to give me everything and walk away. Do you have any idea how ridiculous that is? It's not ridiculous. It's decent. It's both. Rosalie moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the tear tracks on her cheeks, the way her lips curved when she smiled. Garrett Cole, I've spent 16 years hidden away because my father decided my scar made me unmarriageable. I've watched other women my age court and marry and build lives while I stayed in this house like some kind of cursed princess in a tower. And I've told myself I was fine with it, that I didn't need marriage or companionship or love. But, Garrett prompted when she didn't continue. But I was lying to myself. Rosalie's voice was soft now, vulnerable. I do want those things. I want to be seen as more than my scar. I want someone to look at me and see Rosalie, not just that poor scarred girl. And today, when you lifted that veil and looked at me like I was beautiful. Her voice broke. No one's ever looked at me like that before. Garrett's heart did something complicated in his chest. How did I look at you? Like I took your breath away. Rosalie's eyes were bright with fresh tears, but she was smiling. Like you couldn't believe what you were seeing. Not because it was terrible, but because it was good. Better than you expected. You looked at me like I was a gift, not a burden. You are, Garrett said without thinking. I spent 2 weeks dreading this moment, and instead it's you. He couldn't find the words, so he did something reckless instead. He reached up and touched her face again, his fingers tracing the line of her scar from her eyebrow to her jaw. You're the best surprise I've ever gotten, Rosalie Ashford. And I know we don't know each other yet. I know this is strange and forced and probably doomed to fail. But if you're willing to try, if you're willing to give us a chance, then I'm all in. Rosalie leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. What if we try and it doesn't work? What if we spend years together and realize we're miserable? Then we'll have tried. That's more than a lot of people can say. Garrett's thumb brushed her cheekbone, careful and reverent. But Rosalie, I've got a feeling we might surprise ourselves. We've both spent our lives being judged for things we can't control. We both know what it's like to be dismissed, to be hidden away, to be told we're not good enough. Maybe that's enough common ground to build something real. Maybe, Rosalie whispered. Then she opened her eyes, and they were full of something that looked like hope. Garrett, I need you to understand something. I'm not fragile. I'm not some delicate flower that needs protecting. I've lived with this scar for 16 years. I've heard the whispers, seen the disgust, felt the rejection. And I'm still standing. I'm still strong. So if we do this, if we try to build a real marriage, you have to see me as an equal, not as something broken that needs fixing. I don't think you're broken, Garrett said honestly. I think you're probably the strongest person I've ever met. It takes real courage to stand in front of someone after years of rejection and give them a chance anyway. Then we agreed. Rosalie stepped back, straightened her shoulders, and held out her hand like she was proposing a business arrangement. We try. Really try. No more lies, no more manipulation, just honesty and effort and seeing where this goes. Garrett took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he brought it to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and exactly right. Agreed. Rosalie's breath hitched, and color flooded her cheeks. We should probably rejoin the others. They'll be wondering if we've killed each other. Let them wonder a bit longer. Garrett didn't release her hand. I want to know something first. When your father told you about his plan about forcing me to marry you, what did you think? Rosalie bit her lip, considering. I was furious, heartbroken. I told him I wouldn't do it, that I wouldn't trap some poor man in a marriage with someone he'd find repulsive. But then he told me it was you, and I. She trailed off, color deepening in her cheeks. You what? I've seen you, Garrett, from my window. I've watched you work with the horses, seen how patient you are with the young hands, noticed how you always check on the animals before you leave for the day. She looked down at their joined hands. I've heard the men in town about how you're fair and honest and kind. And I thought, if I had to be married to someone against my will, at least it would be someone decent. Someone who might not hate me completely. Garrett's chest tightened. You've been watching me. For 3 years, Rosalie admitted. Is that strange? It's Garrett laughed, surprised by the relief flooding through him. It's actually kind of perfect. Because it means you know more about me than I know about you. So you've got the advantage. Then I'll share it with you. Rosalie squeezed his hand. I constantly read novels, poetry, history, anything I can get my hands on. I manage the household accounts because Papa can't read well enough to do it himself. He's not illiterate, but letters dance around on him in a way that makes numbers easier. I can ride better than most of the hands, though I haven't been on a horse in years because Papa worries I'll be seen. I play piano. I garden. I've spent 16 years becoming as interesting as possible because I figured if I couldn't be beautiful, I should at least be accomplished. You're both, Garrett said firmly, and I'd like to know more. All of it. Everything you'll tell me. That might take a while. We've got time. Garrett smiled at her and really smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed in 2 weeks. We've got the rest of our lives, apparently. Rosalie smiled back, and it transformed her face completely. The scar crinkled at the corner of her eye, and Garrett thought it might be his favorite part of her. The mark that proved she'd survived fire and loss and rejection and come through it still capable of smiling. Then let's go face my father, Rosalie said. And let's show him that his manipulation might have gotten us here, but what we build from here is ours alone. They found the others in the dining room, where Constance had laid out a small meal for the post-wedding celebration. Ashford stood when they entered, his face anxious, clearly expecting Rosalie's fury to have grown rather than cooled. Rosalie, sweetheart, we'll discuss your lies later, Papa. Rosalie cut him off, her voice cool but controlled. Right now, we're going to eat this meal you've prepared, and we're going to be civil, because Garrett and I have decided to give this marriage a real try. But make no mistake, you manipulated both of us, and that's not something I'll forget or forgive easily. Ashford's expression crumbled with relief. You're staying together. We're trying, Garrett said, his hand finding Rosalie's and squeezing. Despite your interference, not because of it. And so, with all due respect, you and I are going to have a long conversation about what you did. But that can wait until after we eat. The meal was awkward but not hostile. Constance chatted nervously about nothing, filling the silences. Doc Patterson offered quiet congratulations. Reverend Walsh blessed the union and left as quickly as propriety allowed. And through it all, Garrett kept glancing at Rosalie, his wife, and marveling at the fact that the woman sitting beside him was nothing like what he'd been told to expect. She was articulate and funny, slipping dry observations about her father's meddling into the conversation in ways that made even Ashford wince. She was educated, discussing books Garrett had never heard of with an enthusiasm that was infectious. She was kind, thanking Constance for her help with the preparations and making Doc Patterson laugh with a story about the time she tried to help him treat an injured horse and nearly got kicked for her trouble. She was, Garrett realized with something like wonder, exactly the kind of woman he'd have chosen if he'd had the chance. Smart, strong, beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with physical appearance and everything to do with character. And she had been hidden away for 16 years because of a scar that barely existed. The waste of it made Garrett furious, but more than that, it made him grateful. Because if Ashford hadn't manipulated them both, Garrett never would have met her, never would have had the chance to know her. Maybe, he thought as he watched Rosalie laugh at something Constance said, maybe some good could come from even the worst manipulations. After the meal, when the others had finally departed and Ashford had retreated to his study to give them privacy, Garrett stood with Rosalie in the hallway at the foot of the stairs. I should show you to your room, Rosalie said, suddenly shy. Papa said he put you in the guest room. It's next to mine, if that's all right. It's fine. Garrett followed her up the stairs, watching the way her dress whispered against the steps. Rosalie, about tonight. I meant what I said earlier. I'm not expecting anything from you. We can take this as slow as you want. She paused at the top of the stairs, looking back at him. What if I don't want to take it slow? Garrett's heart stuttered. What? I'm 24 years old, Rosalie said, her cheeks flushing but her voice steady. I've spent those 24 years hidden away, told I was too scared to be wanted, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection anyone might throw my way. And today, for the first time in my life, a man looked at me like I was beautiful, like I was desirable, like I was worth wanting. She moved down one step, closer to him. So what if I don't want to wait? What if I want to know what it feels like to be wanted, to be touched by someone who doesn't see me as an obligation? Garrett's mouth went dry. Rosalie, I don't want to rush you into something because you feel like you have to prove something. I'm not proving anything. I'm choosing. She came down another step, close enough now that he could smell lavender and honey. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what I want. And I want you, Garrett Cole. Maybe that's crazy. Maybe we'll regret this tomorrow. But right now, I want to know what it feels like to be someone's wife in every sense of the word. Garrett looked at her, at this brave, beautiful woman who'd been hidden for so long and was now choosing to be seen, and made a choice of his own. He reached up and cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs gentle against her cheeks, one of them tracing her scar. Then let me choose too, he said softly. I choose you, Rosalie Ashford Cole. Not because I was forced, not because I have to, but because in the space of a single afternoon, you've become the most interesting, most beautiful, most captivating woman I've ever met. And then he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape of each other's lips. But then Rosalie made a small sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like promise and possibility, and the beginning of something neither of them had expected. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rosalie was smiling. Well, she said, her voice slightly breathless, that was worth waiting 24 years for. Garrett laughed and kissed her again, softer this time. Come on, wife. Let me see this room of yours. Our room, Rosalie corrected, taking his hand and leading him down the hallway. Starting tonight, it's our room. 1 year later, Garrett woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and his wife's head on his chest, her scarred cheek pressed against his skin. He ran his fingers through her unbound hair and marveled, as he did every morning, that this was his life now. 1 year. They'd been married 1 year, and every day had been better than the last. It hadn't been easy. They'd fought about her father's manipulation, about Garrett's tendency to treat her like she was fragile, about whether they should stay on the ranch or strike out on their own. But they'd talked through every argument, learned each other's boundaries, built something real from the false foundation of their marriage. Victor Ashford had died 3 months ago, his cancer finally claiming him. He'd lived long enough to see his daughter happy, to see the marriage he'd manipulated actually succeed. And on his deathbed, he'd apologized to them both, not for forcing the marriage, but for the way he'd done it. For the lies and manipulation rather than trusting them to build something real on their own. Garrett had forgiven him. Rosalie hadn't, not completely. But she'd held her father's hand as he died, and she'd cried for the man who'd loved her enough to become a monster trying to protect her. The ranch was theirs now. Rosalie had inherited the main property, and Garrett's 10,000 acres adjoined it, making them the largest landholders in 3 counties. They'd combined the operations, worked side by side to improve conditions for the hands and productivity for the cattle. Rosalie had proven herself a brilliant manager, and the hands who'd once wondered about Ashford's hidden daughter now followed her orders without question. And every night, Garrett came home to a woman who'd been told she was too scared to be loved and loved her anyway. Every night, he traced that silver line on her face and thanked whatever powers existed that Victor Ashford had been desperate enough to manipulate them both. You're thinking too loud, Rosalie murmured against his chest. It's too early for thinking. I'm thinking about how I got the best surprise of my life a year ago today, Garrett said, kissing the top of her head. Rosalie propped herself up on one elbow, her hair falling around her face, her scar catching the morning light. And what surprise was that? Finding out that the woman I was being forced to marry was exactly the woman I would have chosen if I'd had the choice. Garrett traced her scar with his finger, the gesture as familiar now as breathing. You're beautiful, Rosalie Cole. Every single part of you. Even the parts that are scarred. Especially those parts. Garrett pulled her down for a kiss. Because they are part of your story. Part of what made you strong enough to give us a chance. Rosalie smiled against his lips. We should thank Papa, really. His manipulation worked out pretty well. Don't let him hear you say that. He'll gloat from beyond the grave. Let him. Rosalie settled back against Garrett's chest. I spent 16 years hidden away, and now I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, with a man who sees all of me and doesn't look away. Never, Garrett promised. I'll never look away from you, Rosalie. You're too beautiful to look away from. And in the morning light of their bedroom, with the ranch waking up around them and a future full of possibility stretching ahead, they held each other and were grateful for manipulative fathers and forced marriages and the unexpected gift of finding love in the last place they'd expected it. Sometimes, they discovered, the best surprises came wrapped in threats and coercion and lies designed to protect. And sometimes, just sometimes, being forced together was exactly what two people needed to discover they'd been meant for each other all along. So here's my question for you. If someone had lied to you about your future spouse's appearance to test whether you'd marry them anyway, would you forgive the manipulation once you discovered the truth and fell in love? Or would the deception be too much to overcome? Share your thoughts in the comments. I love hearing your perspectives on these impossible situations. And if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button because we've got more true Western tales that prove love can bloom in the most unexpected places. Thanks for reading, and I'll see you in the next story.